Now, we're going to talk about something today that I've actually been wanting to talk to you about for a while, but there's been so many things going on that it's kind of hard. So hit that like button on the way in. If you haven't subscribed yet, let's subscribe. But today we have to talk about SRTs. What are SRTs? Significant risk transfer. That, my friends, is a product that Wall Street has come up with. And I would say usually you always have to pay attention to how they name something. Usually it's just the opposite, but in this case, no, we are looking at significant risk transfer to you. So you need to be aware of it and you need to do something about it. Let's just go to these slides, because banks are dumping exposure onto investors and posing risk to financial stability. This comes out of the most current, which we're going to dive into, October financial stability report from the International Monetary Fund. But risk transfer. Okay, so somebody says people don't understand that. Well, let's see. If you were taking a risk and you took on a lot of debt and you had a way to transfer that risk from you to somebody else, that's what we're talking about here. That's simple. Because on top of just transferring the risk, the products that Wall Street is making, I mean, it's incredible that any of this should be legal, but hey, it's all contract based. If you don't hold it, you don't own it. Is putting leverage on the SRTs, and leverage is simply this: debt upon debt upon debt, layers and layers and layers of debt on top of transferring the risk of debt. I mean, you have to go, huh? Well, if they make it really complicated, it's so that you don't question them. Make no mistake about it. But for now, asset pools seem to be of high quality. So in other words, what they're saying is all of this debt seems to kind of be in, higher quality. They'll be able to make it, but that's changing. All right, let's just kind of dive right in. Corporate leverage, debt upon debt upon debt, is now at the highest levels since the aftermath of the financial crisis. They're talking about 2008, and crash buffers are dwindling, which means that, if you take on a lot of debt and you have absolutely no cash and you run into a problem, how are you going to pay that debt? How will you service that debt? So the leverage is at the highest levels. Cash buffers are dwindling. So what they're doing is they're transferring that risk to you. I'll get more into this. Concerns around the quality of the assets, the credit quality, being bundled into significant risk transfers are rising among market participants, and the opaque transactions could increase risk to financial stability. Nobody's tracking this stuff. That means that it's the bottom part of the iceberg that no supervisor, nobody can see. They don't know when and how this is going to hit. That's the whole point of being prepared, so that no matter what happens, you are okay. And those people that think we've got all this time, you got as much time as you have and not 1 second more, and nobody can tell you when that's going to be. But the transfers, I'll get into this more, may also mask a traditional lender's resiliency. So we go through those stress tests on the banks, and everybody passes. They don't have good living wills, so if one of them gets into trouble, they're not going to be able to be unwound. And on top of this, you've got these opaque markets that nobody can see what's going on. Great. That sounds like a great recipe to me. So I think that what we're looking at is certainly a black swan event, but the great financial crisis part 2, is that what we're looking at here? quite possibly. Now, this just came up this morning, and I thought that it was really easy because Commerce Banks sell SRT. SRT stands for Significant Risk Transfer, as CEO embarks on a plan to free up capital. So they're keeping this garbage or this debt on the bank's books. They have just taken the risk of default off of those debt instruments and sold them to someone else. That's like in 2008, what happened? The banks kept the mortgages, but they took the promise to pay those mortgages off of the mortgage and put it in a bundle. That's called a CDO, collateralized debt obligation, and sold it, but they still had the risk. Okay, Commerce Bank is seeking to free up capital to create more room for investor payouts. Isn't that interesting? Now, once that money leaves the bank, you can't claw it back when you get into trouble. And we've been watching this happen for a while. So here's JP Morgan's risk swap ends up at familiar places, rival banks. Because even though the SRTs are meant to shift the risks out of the banking system, all of this stuff is incestuously intertwined. The use of leverage by buyers of the complex securities is calling that into question because they go to the other banks to borrow the money to buy these significant risk transfers. So it just creates this big doom loop. But it's a booming business, so banks are making money on it. So what do they care, right? Look at the use of SRTs. Banks issued about 25 billion of SRTs in 2023, partially offloading the risk of 300 billions of loans. But then they're borrowing on top of that, creating all of that leverage back in the banking system, and that creates what's called a doom loop. So this goes down, it has an impact here, that goes down, it impacts there, on and on and on. I will continue. Between 10% and 50% of the money for these deals could be borrowed, but they don't know. It's opaque. They can't see. This is a guesstimate. It could be 90%. It could be 100%. Nobody knows. Although it is impossible to be certain, given the private bilateral nature of such loans. So this takes, what this is a derivative, right? And a derivative is derived from an asset, but it is not convertible into that asset. So once it's derived from that, and what are they saying? Bilateral nature of such loans. That means that each one of these are unique between two parties. That's it. So there's really no market for these because you're making an agreement with somebody else. Well, can you count on anybody else wanting that same agreement? The answer is no. The answer is no. If a bank's lending against the SRT instrument as collateral, you're clearly not transferring the risk outside of the banking system. So what we're looking at is a whole bunch of garbage, a way for banks to make more money, but they're not really, they are transferring some of this risk. So we're going to get into this in just a second, but it's not really transferring outside of the banking system. It's also a lot of that risk is still being contained inside of it. With the financial sector continuing to transform. You see, I've been talking to you about this, frankly, since 2009, because the system died in 2008. And this is a reset system. So where everybody thinks that this might be something that's going to happen in the future, what you need to understand is they are trying to generate this soft landing so that those that got us into this mess remain in power on the other side of this crisis, I say no. I say let's create a global sound money movement and take their power away and take our power back. Period. I don't like this for the future of our children and our grandchildren and our great-grandchildren. We got to do something about it. But it is imperative that policymakers think through the future of finance. And I would say that it's critically important for you to also be thinking about the future of finance. We can't just sit back and allow it to happen to us. Would it matter to me that much? Frankly, no. I'm 70 years old and I've been accumulating and I'm in good shape because I am as independent and self-sufficient as possible. At least I'm working on it and I'm further ahead than a lot of people. But this isn't just about me. This is about the world. This is about your world and your children and your neighbor's world and their children. And that's why we're all here. At least that's what I believe. We are here to share the gifts that we've been given, and it's time for us to take our power back. And this is the opportunity because the whole currency system is resetting. But let me go back to that significant risk transfer because you guys know I say it all the time. When enough risk has been transferred from the few, from the elites, to the many, to the public, it will become too expensive for the central bankers to keep supporting, and then everything collapses. So this is out of that report. We've got the link below, so go in and read this report yourself. But banks use SRTs to offload risk and claim capital relief because if they offload that risk, that means that they have to hold less cash, less capital in case of a problem. And that's what they were referring to earlier by lower cash buffers. And once that money goes out of the banking system, it's not there if they get into trouble. So what you're looking at is if there were they just keep creating products to keep this thing going until it can't anymore. Okay, this drives me crazy. This is a stylized example of a direct bank issued loan, basically. Without any SRTs, they do $100,000 portfolio and they have to hold capital requirement is 10.5%. Now, if they do the SRTs, then that same capital requirement is only 3.8%, basically freeing up an additional 7% that they can go out and send out to investors or use to buy other stuff or gamble with or what have you. So can you see how this new product that they created, it's been around for a little while, but just since 2016, this is not a lot of time. It has been untested, but this could easily topple the system because you can't really ultimately transfer risk. And if banks are loaning entities money to buy these SRTs, it's not outside of the system. Okay, so you can see how that benefits the bank. This synthetic securitization volumes have grown in recent years. Yeah, they've started in 2016, and you can see where they are right now. This is the EU in green, UK is in sort of this reddish color, and then the others, all others, are in blue. Great. So you can see the level of growth, and that's what always happens, right? Oh, here's a new accounting trick. They don't really change behavior. They just change how they account for that behavior. And the more opaque it is, that means that you and I can't see it for sure, but neither can the regulators. Neither can the regulators. Not that they, all right, I won't go there, but credit risk indices suggest asset quality in SRT reference pools is starting to deteriorate, and actually in a very, very big way. And it doesn't matter where these SRTs are generated, although the U.S. credit quality is deteriorating faster, they're all deteriorating. Of course they are. Of course they are. And considering the fact that grading and rating services kind of tweak things based upon whatever formulas, because let's see, who pays them? The corporations that they're rating. Yay. We don't really know about any of this debt being actually what the real credit quality is. So the fact that they're concerned about the deterioration is kind of important. Meet the new derivative that could implode the global financial system. It hasn't been around that long, hasn't been tested yet. It's about to be tested, and similar to CDOs, where they took the promise to pay that mortgage out of the mortgage. That's what they're doing here. They're taking the promise to pay this debt off of the debt and selling it to investors, but banks are loaning those investors, and we'll talk about that and who they are in just a second, but banks are loaning those investors the money to buy these synthetic and significant risk transfer products, these derivatives. I mean, is it starting to make your head swim? Because that's the whole point of it anyway. So the question that the IMF asked is this managing risks or creating new ones? My opinion, creating new ones, and you can't even see them coming because they're the bottom of the iceberg. SRT moved the credit risks associated with a pool of assets from banks to investors, partially so. An increasing number of banks around the world have begun using these synthetic risk transfers to manage credit risk and lower capital requirements, like I just showed you. Globally, more than 1.1 trillion in assets have been synthetically securitized since 2016. And we have no idea of the leverage that's used in them. So if they're just talking about 1.1 trillion, frankly, that leverage, I mean, gosh, in derivatives, they've shown that they could be easily more than 1,000 to 1. We could be looking in the quadrillions of risk. And remember, in those derivative products, every single entity, the IMF, the BIS, the FDIC, the Federal Reserve, the World Bank, take your pick. Nobody knows the true value of the assets at risk. I'm telling you, when this thing implodes, it becomes a black hole, sucking everything in with it. Except for this. That's why you hold it, you own it outright, it runs no counterparty risk. What I'm showing you is beneath the surface, this is all counterparty risk. And it scares the crap out of me. I'm not going to lie. In Europe, issuers of SRTs include globally systemically important banks and large banks, whereas in the U.S., regional banks issue SRTs as well. Why not? It's the party. It's the banking party. You and I don't get to play, but they all get to play. We just get to pay. Private credit funds are the dominant buyers, with a market share exceeding 60%, followed by pension funds with close to 20%. So what do we know about these private credit funds? They're not private anymore. That the funding to support these private markets has grown to a level where they're selling it to you and me, and you don't even realize the risk that you're taking. Right? When enough risk has been transferred, these markets will become too expensive to support, and who's going to be left holding the bag? same entities that are always left holding the bag. It's just that simple. And that, my friends, is when this crisis becomes clear. So let's see. IMF stated dangers of SRTs. Elevated interconnectedness between banks and private markets. There is no escape from this. Elevated leverage levels last seen in the aftermath of the great financial crisis, but the reality is they don't even know how much leverage is really in these. They just know it's elevated, right? Lower capital coverage, like I showed you, where they transfer this risk, so therefore they have to hold less money in their coffers in case of emergency. That's great. Opaque bilateral trade, which means that nobody can really see what's going on. And this is an agreement between two parties, bilateral. So that means there isn't even a market for them, other than the ones that are between the two entities that agree to this. Banks providing loans to buy loans issued by other banks. So that's not transferring the risk out of the banking system. That's keeping the risk inside of the banking system, but also engaging the private markets at the same time. May hide weak fundamentals of the banks, right? We've seen a number of banks go down since 2023. We know that they're all underwater, especially with any of the debt that they bought over 15 years of zero interest rate policy. All of that debt is completely underwater. So it really hides the weakness of the bank. You need to have more than one bank, let me tell you. And it masks the bank's resilience. So if there is a run on the bank and they have left less money in there, number one, they're going to have a hard time paying you out, aren't they? Just like we've seen with Synapse and the problems that they're having paying out their deposits to all of their customers. And you really can't tell the health of the bank because it's all about hiding the truth. How many times can you be lied to when you do not know the truth? Every single time. And then a negative doom loop during a liquidity squeeze. So as I said before, so this bank gets into trouble. That is then passed on because they can't pay the debt to this bank, which then can't pay to that bank, which then can't pay to that bank, which then can't pay to that bank, which can't pay to you. So that's that doom loop that continuously reinforces if things don't go perfect in every area of this transaction. And complex products make the identity of the ultimate risk holder less clear. So what happened in Synapse? Because of all of the hypothecation and rehypothecation, so all that leverage from this bank to 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 this bank, it's not clear where money evaporated or actually who even owns what and where it is. And that's what they're saying here. These complex products make the identity of the ultimate risk holder less clear. Guess who that ultimate risk holder is? SRT's doom loop could trigger a total collapse with you holding the bag as usual. And if you're dependent on that system, you're gonna be holding the bag. It becomes more and more critical that you call and get your sound money strategy in place today, because you or I, none of us can actually tell you when exactly this is going to happen. But what we do know is that it will happen. And if you don't have things in place when it does, it's too late to do anything about it then. You need to have hard, tangible assets outside of the system, just like the banks do. We're talking about something that's all digital, that's derivative. It's even worse than it being just all digital. It is that debt upon debt upon debt upon debt, these complex problems, right? So central banks reported 40 tons of net buying in September via blah, blah, blah. Demand recovered during the month, so the monthly gross purchases of 48 trillion were offset by a little bit of 8 trillion in sales. That means this is a month over month change of 600% month over month. So those that actually understand to a degree, because remember, this is an opaque market, they know what's going on. They're getting prepared for it. Are you? Are you fully prepared? If you haven't set up your strategy, get it done. If you set it up but you haven't executed it, get it done. Get it done. Food, water, energy, security, barterability, wealth preservation, community, and shelter. These are the things that we know. And yes, there are lots of subcategories, no doubt about it. But there's medicine. There's all sorts of subcategories in the 8 key mantra pieces that really, frankly, I developed them as I was doing it for myself. So it's not perfect, but it's a place to start. And these are all the things that we need to sustain a reasonable standard of living. So if you don't have them done, that's what makes local community getting that piece done right now, ASAP, a top priority. Because, look, when 2008 happened, I knew the system died. There wasn't one doubt in my mind. And so that's when I became an urban farmer. I'm not a farmer or even really much of a gardener by nature, but I understand currency life cycles, and I understand that food, that what we're talking about in the mantra pieces, that food becomes the single biggest issue for most people. Go to a local farmer's market, get to know the people that purvey and create your food, give them a day's labor or so, learn a new skill, create that relationship. Because we are so much stronger when we come together than as an individual. I'm one person. What can I do? Nothing, not much. But together, we can do everything. We can make the change happen. So globally, we've also got to do it because this new monetary system must have convertible sound money in its system, or it doesn't mean anything, as Zimbabwe just showed us. If you don't hold it, you don't own it. And if you can't convert it out of the currency, it's not backed, it's pegged, it's linked to the manipulated spot price, it means nothing. If enough of us buy gold and silver on a global basis, 8.4 people in this world, we can make a difference. Absolutely. We can. So central banks are loading up on sound money because they want to retain their freedom and their choices. And they know that we're about to have a huge crisis because they need it. They're engineering it. And they've already announced to you via those 50 basis point interest rate drops that they're ready for the hyperinflation. They're ready. Are you? Because it's critically important. What? Another bank, just recently failed. First National Bank of Lindsay. Is that a one-off? Because every time these banks are failing since 2023, they want you to think it's a one-off. No, they change things then, right? We know that Silicon Valley Bank and those other banks that failed in really up until the First National Bank of Lindsay, even uninsured deposits. Remember, when they create all of this money, it has to go someplace. It doesn't just evaporate and mean nothing. It goes into all of these garbage products. That's what it does. And that pushes the values in terms of dollars, the nominal value, up, but it also pushes the purchasing power value of all of this down. And they know that there is Even go to the Fred. You can see it yourself. There's virtually no purchasing power left. That requires our confidence, and that's what they're trying to do. Keep our confidence, keep us keeping all of our money. Who needs, goodness gracious, this is so heavy. Why in the world would I want to carry this around? I'd want to carry it around because it's sound money. And I know, because I read their stuff, I know what's coming. I want you to have the ability to make educated choices that puts your best interest first. So if you want to show your support, make sure you give us a like and do it on the way in of any video, please. Leave us a comment. Have these conversations with each other because it really does help the algorithm send this information out, and we need to reach as many people as possible. So please share. Please, together, just look in the mirror and say to yourself, if not me, who? And if not now, when? And let's come together and create both a local and a global movement for our children and our children's children. And until next we meet, please be safe out there. Bye-bye.